Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to this talk. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far, right? OK, I take that as a yes. Never ask the audience questions. I'm so happy to be here. This is a special conference for me, because I know that all the organizers work really hard throughout all the year to prepare this talk. So please give applause for them. Yeah. Thanks, guys. OK, so yeah, this talk was actually initially titled, "Are you ready for Angular V8 and beyond?" But since we're going to cover some of the features and highlight some of the features which are not part of the Angular core, but instead of the Angular ecosystem, so yesterday I decided to change the title and name it "What's Coming Next in the Angular Community, in Angular Ecosystem." So is that fine with you? I still want to stay? OK. All right, so so far so good. There are lots of exciting things coming to the Angular community this year and even next year. So I'm going to try and highlight some of the features. So not all of them are mentioned today in this talk, but most of the interesting one for me at least. As Tiffany mentioned, my name is Wassim. I work at Sphere. I lead the open source program there, which basically means I work full-time on open source projects, internally, but also externally. I'm also advocating for the Angular team. And I help other teams at Google, Google Assistant, Dialogflow team, and Google Cloud Platform on the serverless parts, Kubernetes recently, and some cloud build stuff. Also, I do a lot of open source, as you can see. I tweet at Manikineko. I blog at Medium. And actually, I tweet a lot that my wife offered me this pair of shoes with my Twitter handle on them. I'm wearing them today, so thank you. Yeah, I also I'm trying to focus more and more on developer productivity, on developer experience. So that's why I'm trying to build useful tools for you, for us, developers. So the recent one is XLayer, that app, which is basically an app for designers and developers who wants to collaborate and convert their sketch files into actual code. So this is a work in progress. Also things like NGX tools, which is an NPM-like tool for Angular. So if you're looking for Angular packages, schematics, modules, you should use NGX tools. And I'm mentioning these products actually because we are in October, and October is Oktoberfest. Who is participating in Oktoberfest? 3, 4 hands? That's not enough. You should actually. So the event is organized mainly by GitHub, and they're trying actually to support open source. So they're encouraging you to send pull requests to different projects, and if you manage to have 4 pull requests merge in a repo, they will send you a T-shirt. So all of my projects, libraries, and tools have some labels, issues labeled Oktoberfest, so you should check them out, and I promise I will merge your pull requests. I put this picture because it always reminds me that behind the Angular tool, the framework we're using every day, there's actually actual people working on them. There's a community, and that's why I really love doing this for them. So that's also the moment where I thank the Angular team for creating Angular. Yeah, some announcements. As you heard, I work at Sphere, mainly in Paris, and recently we opened Sphere in Nantes. And so if you need consultancy work, if you need cloud to build cloud applications, mobile web, you could check out the Sphere team. We are a P2 booth, I guess, outside, or you could talk to me after the conference. So yeah, we're here to talk about anything you want in these categories. And also, you could just tweet at me on Twitter. And also, you don't need to follow my account. You just ping me on Twitter. My DMs are open, always open. All right, last thing before we start. If you're looking for an Angular application, like a reference demo app or toy app, as you can name it, with like mainly, which is like cacheable, installable, which has a good, like great search experience with an up-to-date patterns, Angular patterns. We've built this tool for like this app as a reference for you guys. So you could check it at searchapp.store. It's an Angular app. It's open source. And also, it's part of the Oktoberfest event. So all your contributions are welcome. All right, ready to dive in? Yeah, okay. So, okay, the cat is ready. So, first thing first. So, Angular 6 is already out for a couple of months now. And the team is, like, with Angular 6 and Angular 7 mainly, they are focusing on building a better DX, developer experience, like better tooling, better API, better ergonomics with these versions. So most of the features we're going to cover today are towards developer experience and improving developer experience. First, the build system. So as you might know today, Angular is using Webpack under the hood to build our Angular applications in production. And recently, the core team is experimenting with a new build system called Basil. Basil is actually the open source version of an internal tool at Google called Blaze, which Google have been using for the last 10 years to build their internal applications inside their monorepo. Huge monorepo. So basically, with Basil, you will get really a lot of speed because it uses incremental builds. And also, you will be able to run local but also distributed executions tasks on the cloud, and also run in parallel tests and builds as well. It's really great for like small or like huge teams, no matter the size, and also the code base. And also, Basil is not only meant for Angular, because we are an Angular talk, but it's polyglot tool. You can use it to build almost anything, like OCaml, Dockerfile, Java, protobuffers, anything you like. It's basically a set of rules or plugins. So if you don't find your technology, you could contribute with yours. And for Angular, the one we were interested in is TypeScript. Actually, TypeScript, the TypeScript rule for Basil is being contributed by the Angular core team. So basically, to give you like a glimpse, you'll define an ng module using the Basil rule, which is a Python-like syntax. I'll give it a name, give it dependencies and everything, and then have a build file somewhere in your Angular or in packages, and then just run run the tool. So the Angular team provides a set of rules, like ng module, taste library. Taste library allows you to build TypeScript libraries, which are not Angular dependent. And you get also things like running tests, running local development servers, and also bundling actually your app using rollup. So why Basil is fast? Why is it fast? This is actually a sample app, like a Hello World application, and the graph was generated using Basil. So Basil basically creates an internal AST, a graph, direct graph, and it's able actually to rebuild only what the files that have changed, whether like in your source files or test files. So it's really incredibly fast. So this is a real-world application. This was part of my last project, actually, at Sphere. So if you zoom in, there are lots and lots and lots of files. So Basil is really good for this kind of applications, in my opinion. And now the good news, I mean, actually it's been like for the past months, Angular core itself is built using Basil. And also things like projects such as NGRX, Material Design, Angular CLI are all built using Basil. So again, just specify the build file, build.basil, inside the packages you want. And then soon you will be able to run Basil throughout, like via the CLI, just using a different architect target, which is still under development. So the roadmap for Basil, code splitting is working. Using remote execution builds are working internally, but just ask me a question about these two last features after the talk because they are specific to Angular. And soon we should have the Angular CLI integration. So for us developers, it should be like transparent. Just run ng build, and the CLI should switch to Basil. If you want to know more, Alex Eagle from the core team has been working on this project for so long time, like a long time. I've been trying to give him some help, like trying to validate the Basil build on a couple of our projects. So check out the URL. He has a very like detailed issue, like documentation on the subject. So if you're interested, also as a bonus, I've been working on getting a pipeline using Kubernetes and Google Cloud builds for an Angular app, and yeah, using Basil. So come talk to me after the talk if you want to know more about this. That was the first feature. Who's excited about Basil? Okay, like a third of the audience, right? Next topic, Angular schematics. So next question, who's using Angular CLI? All right, like maybe like 70%. It should be like 100% of the room, actually. Angular CLI is really cool if you don't want to mess with the Webpack configuration. So schematics, the Schematics API is basically, as I like to define it, a set of plugins for your CLI. So for instance, when you use the CLI to scaffold the whole application or build it, test it, or generate components or services, whatever you like, you're actually using schematics under the hood, like in the recent implementation. So with schematics, you would be able to either replace the default implementation of like a generate command or a test command with your own custom one, or you could like just extend it. For instance, if you're working on a project like at a corporation or company, and you have your own guidelines, your own set of like formatting rules or whatever, or namespace or anything, you could create schematics for that, and next time when you generate a component, use it with your own schematics. The Angular team already provides a couple of schematics, like the ng update command, which basically updates your Angular app. Like update bumps the Angular core dependencies versions. So for instance, if you want to update to the next version of Angular, you could use ng update Angular core, Angular CLI, and if you are using Angular material design components, just add the package. And also, if you want to test the next iteration, like experimental version, just add -- next. There are other packages you could install, like Progressive Web App, which would like instantly create a service worker for you, update your HTML file, adds like icons, anything, like everything you should have to have working progressive web app, Angular application. Other packages, other schematics from the community, like ng Bootstrap. Recently, the NativeScript team has also released their schematic for NativeScript, so check them up. And this screenshot is made by Stephen Fluin from the Angular team, where he's generating a whole dashboard application with the Angular material schematic by the Angular team. And this is really mind-blowing, because in one line of command you have the backbone, you have the basic building blocks for a dashboard application. You could also, they're also providing a command to generate a data table, like menu, like many other starters, if you will. So for the next version of Angular CLI, version 7, we will have an interactive prompts inside, provided by the schematic API, where basically a schematic would be able to ask you questions and ask your feedback before running the code. Obviously, Angular CLI 7 supports Angular 7. And also, which is really interesting, it also supports Node.js version 10 and TypeScript 3. Did I mention that the schematics are open, so anyone can build their schematics? Yeah, I did mention that. So there is actually a CLI command for schematics, which is part of the devkit package. So install it globally, run the schematics command, and give it, for instance, DevFest name here, DevFest Nantes, and it scaffold a schematic blueprint for you. So you could be able to use it and add more feature if you like. So because the schematics API is going to allow us developers to create our own schematics, I thought about it and I said, okay, so maybe in the coming months we need to have a tool that can search only through schematics, like some sort of marketplace, just instead of going on the internet and looking for a specific schematic. We could have a CLI tool, run the schematics, have some autocomplete features. Okay, I want this and this plus stuff or whatever. It finds the schematics, hit enter, and boom, it installs everything for you. So this is actually a working prototype, but it's still an open issue discussion on the CLI repo. So if you find this useful, please give us your feedback. I should mention also that the search experience behind this prototype is then using the Algolia indexes. So kudos to the team at Algolia. If you want to know more about the schematics, Hans from the Angular team has written an excellent article about the subject, so please check it out. Schematics, who's excited about this, the topic? Nice. All right, next subject, component of kit. So this should be an interesting topic for those who are using the Angular material design component in their projects. So if you're anything like me and uses Angular material and want to actually override some of the theming provided by the Angular team, either you use the internal API to implement your own theming, but if you're on a project and your PM asks you, okay, I want this component to look like this, and I want to override not only the UI, but also the UX, the user experience, which, by the way, you shouldn't be doing with the Angular material. If you need a different user experience, use a different UI toolkit. So basically, when you're using like a dialog or a list or anything from the Angular material components, and you want to customize it with your own implementation, you could use the CDK. So the CDKs are the JavaScript behavior of the component without the UI, actually. So you use the behavior of the component from the CDK and implement your own UI, your own UX on top of it. So that's what they are meant for. And for V7, the team added the drag and drop and virtual scrolling. Excuse me. So Jeremiah from the Material team has also written blog posts about this on the Angular blog. That was quick. Next topic, observables. So who's an observable developer in the audience? Actually, I forgot to ask, who's an Angular developer? Everyone, I guess, no. The other ones are curious, okay. So if you're basically an Angular developer, you're like, by definition, an observable. You have to use observables because the Angular core, the HTTP, the forms are using streams under the hood. So, and yeah, also if you're using NGRX, for instance. So, Ben from now he's on the Angular team, but he's also the core maintainer of ArcGIS. He had opened an issue on the WAT working group where he actually, his suggestion to add the observable API to the DOM, to the browser. What does this mean? This means that if the observable API is implemented, is built inside the browser, we would have, as developers, as third-party developers, we won't need to include polyfills, we won't need to include libraries like ArcGIS, for instance, or other implementations. And then we, obviously, and I hope, we would have a smaller code of our app shipped to the browser, which obviously should improve the time to interact with the TTI or the page load of your app. So for instance, you would, if you're familiar with the Observables API and ArcGIS, you have these set of operators, map, filter, flat map. So imagine if you, from the DOM, you just request, you select an image, call stream, and then subscribe to the stream, and boom, you have it. No more add event listener for this kind of events. You could still use add event listeners for single reaction, but for stream events, I think it's better to have a stream API for that. So if this topic interests you, please watch and start the issue on GitHub. And also, if you are part of other communities, Vue or React or other JavaScript communities, please reach out to them and let them give their feedback to this. Okay. Next topic, Angular elements. I guess everyone here in the room knows about the web component specifications, HTML templates in imports, shadow DOM. What's the fourth one? Yep. Right, custom elements. Come on, guys. So yeah, custom elements. So basically, web components allow you to build a standalone HTML elements, which you can use on any web page because it's a standard API now. So basically, what the Angular team has done is provide us with an API that will enable us to use our Angular components as if they were custom elements. So that's like crazy idea. And actually, it's kind of working. So here is question for you. Can you spot the Angular elements in this burger menu? Like I give you 4 seconds for that. Who can tell me which one is the Angular element? All right. Actually, you can't, because from the outside world, they're just custom elements that the browser knows how to handle them. Whether you are an Angular app or a React or any other framework or library, from the outside there are just custom elements. But on the inside, there are Angular elements. So there is an Angular context running there, an Angular like everything, services, anything you can think of. And the cool thing is they are self-bootstrapping, so you don't need to provide the Angular framework around it. Everything is packaged. Yep, custom elements everywhere. So the recent API that allow us to register an Angular component as a custom element is quite simple. Just like on the constructor, call the create custom element method, a function, and give it the Angular component, and this will give you a reference to the actual custom element, which then you could use it to define it on the browser DOM API. Rob Wormald from the Angular core team has given a talk recently about this, and also the future of Angular elements. So you should definitely check this YouTube video. Actually, I think I'm going too fast on my talk, so we'll have like really more time to ask questions if you want, or more time for break. So the roadmap actually for Angular elements is really exciting because everything is done and the API is already available. So you could use it today. And as a starter, actually, the Angular core team has been experimenting the Angular elements inside of Angular.io, which is the official Angular website. By the way, the Angular.io is also the experimentation labs for the Angular team. So everything new in Angular is being experimented there, and also being validated internally, but that's a different topic. All right, so that should be actually the last new feature coming in Angular, IV, which is the newest render API. So up till now, we had 3 different implementations, and this is the 4th implementation, hence IV. So when we talk actually about renderers in the Angular community, in the Angular world, and compilers, we're referring to the actual code that takes your Angular templates, HTML templates, and convert them to actual JavaScript, not TypeScript and then JavaScript. So the goals with IV is to reduce the amount of code being generated by the compiler, and also provide a much simpler debugging API. Who has gone crazy about debugging Angular applications today? Like all in the stack, JavaScript stack? Yeah, probably all of us. You need to really figure out where the error actually is. So also with this new compiler, we should have a much faster compilation phase. And the most important thing for the Angular team was to provide a non-breaking API, because they didn't want us to like have to modify, update our applications in order to use the new Ivy. So before Ivy, the blue bar actually is the actual code of a simple hello world Angular app without Zone.js, 36 KB, and the initial target, which was actually defined by Brad Green, was 10 KB. He wanted the team actually last year to build build a new compiler that would generate, will produce, a simple hello app with 10 KB. So as you can imagine, the team has gone beyond the expectation, and today with Ivy minified and compressed, a simple hello app is 2.7 KB. And I personally expect this to really have lower numbers in the coming months, because the team have been really working hard around this. So stay tuned. So yeah, why the code is smaller? But basically because the compiler produces way less code generated. That's when we talk about AOT compilation, ahead of time compilation. That's actually what we mean when your compiler takes your Angular HTML templates and convert them to TypeScript, runs the statically analyze the code, and then produce JavaScript. So before IV, if we had to look at the generated code for a simple component, it's 3 or 4 times this amount of code. For the non-breaking part, so IV, as I said, was designed to be backward compatible. It was designed from scratch with a non-breaking API design in mind. That's mainly because Google is the #1 user of Angular. So Angular is being used on projects such as Firebase, Google Cloud Platform Console, and also apps such as Analytics and Express, and a lot more apps internally. So the Angular team can't mess with this, because if there's any issue with this application, the Angular team they have to fix this. So they obviously don't want. So the roadmap again for IV, the runtime and the template compiler implementations are already done. So what is remaining now is testing and documentations mostly. The next step would be to validate these new implementation internally at Google by all these plus 600 application product teams. And then we should probably have a public release. So one really important information to have in mind is IV won't be available in V7. So we've seen actually lots of people on Twitter mainly telling that IV would be released in V7. So I can tell you that's fake news, because there was no such public announcement about this. But I expect it to be enabled or by default in V8, probably before. Since IV is a non-break-in feature, so you should probably expect it in a minor version. I don't know, maybe, okay, I won't say any version. All right, so we're getting to the end of this talk. So we've talked about a couple of features, how to build fast, really distributed builds using Basil, which, by the way, if you want to experiment, I forgot to mention, if you want to experiment at your company with Basil, there's a form where you can register. So you like you could give like feedback to the team. We've talked about the Angular Schematics API, the powerful API, which will allow us to create our own commands, our own set of rules. We've talked about the new UX Component CDK from the Material team. So this is really interesting for anyone who's using Material, actually. But by the way, I'm wrong when I say it's only for those who are using Material, because this is not true. It's actually, if you are for instance, say if you want to build your own UI component, you could still use the CDK and implement your own. So I should say this is for any Angular application, actually, no matter what UI component you are using. Yeah, small feature, which is the observable, which is actually not related to Angular, but since Angular is, since ArcJS actually is the only public dependency of Angular, it was worth it to mention it, and because it's an exciting news, by the way. The last two features are really what the core team has been working on for the last maybe year. Angular components as custom elements, and also a faster Angular compiler. I don't know if I mentioned this, but with Angular components, you basically, so if you have expertise in Angular, you could write your component with Angular, and then ship them as custom elements, so they can be used with other frameworks, with other libraries. So there is no limitation, actually. So you could compose like a Frankenstein application with so many framework and libraries, and have Angular be the core of that app. All right. There are other features I didn't mention, but like they should be mentioned, actually. There is a new API, the slot support for the Angular elements. So the slot API is a custom element API, standard API, like projection, if you know the other term for it. So now elements support that. There's actually a new refresh Material Design 2018 specifications from Google. So the Angular Material team needs to update the current design with those. Also, if you're curious, there is a new Angular Labs package on NPM. So the Angular Labs actually is like the team experiments so many things, so many ideas inside this lab. Some of them will reach stable and be part of Angular core, like Elements, Basil. There are also they started as experimentation, actually, and then now they're coming to core. For you Firebase users in the room, who's using Firebase? Okay, so the Firebase library for Angular has now joined the Angular NPM scope. So you could install it from @angular/fire. And also, if for those who are using the CLI, in the upcoming documentation, there will be actually some sort of reference for all the CLI commands and flags on the documentations. And if you want to check actually the next iteration of the docs, there is a subdomain, next.angular.io, which has a red bar. That means that's experimental. So yeah, if you're curious and want to know more of the upcoming features, why not? Oh, yeah. So I have one more thing. I forgot my iPhone. Yeah. There is actually one more thing. So Angular 7 is going to be released today. So yeah. No? Okay. Come on, you're being recorded, guys. So yeah, when I mean today, it's Pacific time, like in the US, because right now it's 1 a.m. in California, so the Angular team is sleeping, I guess. So we should expect Angular v7 to be announced like tomorrow for us. So please give it a try if you haven't been trying the beta and RCs. From what I know, we've been experimenting with Angular with v7, and on average, it took like 20 minutes to upgrade Angular app from v6 to v7. I'm not saying that it will take you 20 minutes. It really depends on the app, on like the libraries. Usually, people are like, they have a problem actually upgrading to Angular, not because of Angular, but because of the third libraries, third components, third UI components. So you need to wait for these projects to support Angular v7 before upgrading to v7. But v7 core, v7 API material design takes really like less time to upgrade. So please give it a try. Give us your feedback on like GitHub, or ping me on Twitter if something's not working. Yeah. So the future of Angular is smaller because of IV, smaller packaging, smaller code base, generated code base, faster because of Basil, and easier because of what's coming next. That's all for me. Thank you, Vox.